Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis said that he is a terrorist who has come here to kill people.
There she is right behind me. As you can see, that's the Triumph.
Testimony in this case is officially over. Jerry Sandusky did not take the witness stand to testify in his own defense.
Mayor Bloomberg expects all 9 wounded bystanders to make a full recovery. Meanwhile, police continue to probe the relationship between Johnson and his former co-worker to figure out why it all ended in violence. This is a stunned community, as is much of the Northeast and the country, upon hearing of this awful event that happened here today in Newtown, Connecticut. That's a story in Mobile, Alabama. Chris Pollone, NBC News. This morning, several city blocks around the Boston Marathon finish line remain closed. They're considered an active crime scene. Police working through the night to try to determine who's responsible for 2 deadly blasts.
A little more than 4 hours into the 117th Boston Marathon, the race came to a chaotic and violent end. 2 explosions near the finish line, about 12 seconds and 100 yards apart, shattered windows and sent runners, spectators, and officials scrambling for safety.
People were running, sprinting back. The runners were going the other way. There were people running, crying.
Dozens of the wounded were rushed to several Boston hospitals. Among the dead, an 8-year-old boy. Doctors say they are treating wounds from the blast's impact and flying debris. In an instant, they went from treating dehydration and blisters to things you'd see on a battlefield.
There's a variety of injuries. Probably the most common serious injuries are combined lower extremity injuries. Combined meaning bone injuries, soft tissue injuries, and vascular injuries to the lower extremities.
The FBI is leading the investigation. Evidence collection teams have been brought in from New York. At the White House, President Obama vowed it will be a swift and thorough search for whomever planted the devices.
We will find out who did this. We'll find out why they did this. Any responsible individuals, any responsible groups will feel the full weight of justice.
Police questioned a man who was injured and being treated in a Boston hospital, but investigators say he is not considered a suspect nor a person of interest.
Another aspect of this police investigation, investigators spent about 7 hours at an apartment complex not very far from this crime scene in the city of Revere, Massachusetts. Investigators were seen taking out evidence bags and putting them in police cars. However, they were not seen leaving with anyone in custody. That's a story from Boston. Chris Pollone, now back to you.
All right.
At this hour in Newtown, Connecticut, people are starting to gather in at least 3 local churches, holding prayer vigils for the victims, their families of the tragedy that happened in an elementary school here this morning. Meanwhile, police continue their investigation. They say it could take up to 2 more days to identify all the victims and collect all the clues at the elementary school here near me. The big question on everyone's mind tonight is why. It's a tragedy of unimaginable horror. More than a dozen elementary school children brutally murdered by a gunman who walked into a school and opened fire.
There were 18 children who were pronounced dead at the scene. There were 2 children who were transported to area hospital or pronounced dead at the hospital. There were 6 adults that were pronounced dead at the scene.
Frantic parents rushed back to the school, desperate for any information about their children.
We just ran like every other parent, and we found out we couldn't get to the school.
I drove from work. I work in Bridgeport, and I drove back up here, and it was, like I said, it was the longest drive of my life. It was really hard, not knowing.
Teachers barricaded the students in classrooms before they could be evacuated.
Children, beautiful, beautiful children, who had simply come to school to learn.
We heard like shots and everybody went on the ground, and Miss Martin just closed the door and we went to the corner.
Police and SWAT teams surrounded the school and stormed outlying buildings.
Immediately upon arrival, entered the school and began a complete active shooter search of the building. That included checking every door, every crack, every crevice, every portion of that school.
The shooter died inside the school. It's believed the gunman drove there, where he killed his mother, a teacher, and her students.
Shock, disgust. You're also trying to think, why would something like this happen? Of course, there's no answer to that.
The magnitude of the loss of life involving so many children has shaken this community and the nation.
I know there's not a parent in America who doesn't feel the same overwhelming grief that I do. The majority of those who died today were children. Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old.
In Washington, D.C., flags are flying at half-staff as the country mourns with this small Connecticut town that has lost so much. Of course, the thoughts and prayers of this entire community tonight are with those 26 victims that died here at the school, 20 young children under the age of 10 and also 6 adults. Meanwhile, the investigation here continues. That's the story live in Newtown, Connecticut. Chris Pollone, NBC News. Now back to you.
Yeah, Tom, citing a callous and reckless disregard for the safety of children, the NCAA has severely punished Penn State University for having a culture that elevated football above everything else. It's a devastating blow to a once untarnished football program, but NCAA President Mark Emmert says that's exactly what's needed at a place where football caused powerful people to cover up the sexual abuse of young boys.
No matter what we do here today, there is no action we can take that'll remove their pain and anguish. But what we can do is impose sanctions that both reflect the magnitude of these terrible acts.
Penn State did not get the death penalty, a complete suspension of its football program. Too much harm to innocent parties, Emmert says. Instead, the school will pay $60 million for an endowed fund to prevent child sexual abuse, lose 10 football scholarships a year for 4 years, be banned from postseason play during that time, and have all wins from 1998 through last season vacated from the record book, meaning once revered Joe Paterno is no longer the winningest coach in NCAA history.
One of the grave dangers stemming from our love of sports is that the sports themselves can become too big to fail, indeed too big to even challenge.
The NCAA relied on Penn State's own investigation into the Jerry Sandusky scandal in crafting its punishment. Sandusky will spend the rest of his life in jail. Joe Paterno is dead, and his statue is gone from its place outside Beaver Stadium. Other Penn State leaders await trial on criminal charges. Still, the NCAA felt compelled to act.
The right actions on our part, and we feel confident that we're doing the right thing, but no one feels good about this. No one feels like this is a positive situation.
Penn State officials accept the penalty and corrective action. Now Emmert says it's up to Penn State to fix its culture and make sure football never again forces doing the right thing to the sidelines. And NCAA President Mark Emmert says this punishment should reverberate beyond Penn State. He calls it a gut check for any university that participates in college sports. It's a story live in Indianapolis. Chris Pollone, News 4 New York.
Chris, thank you.